And I think we've got about a critical mass here of folks. So I value your time, and I'm glad that you were able to make it. Let's go ahead and launch into the start of today's event. So I'm Neil Scott, part of CCO. I'm one of the founding partners of the Center for Coaching and Organizations. And it is my treat to get to be your host for today's event. Usually Bev is our host for these events, and so I'm doing my best to fill it in her absence today. Welcome to Growth Rings. This is, of course, a Center for Coaching and Organizations learning event. A couple of housekeeping details to take care of right at the outset. There is closed captioning available in Zoom if you need it. So if that's a feature you'd like to take advantage of, there's a little toolbar at the bottom. Just click on the CC icon /live transcript and just click the box at the bottom to enable live transcription. If you have any questions or concerns as we go, please do feel free to take advantage of the chat box. We really enjoy these events because they are so interactive. So we encourage you to continue to make this space your own. If you're able to share your video camera, I see some of you are already sharing your video. That is fantastic. We love the interactivity. And of course, if you're not in a space where you can, totally understand. But it is great to at least see some of the facial interaction as we go along. CCO, as we call it, is a 501c3 nonprofit organization founded by a group of experienced executive coaches and organizational leaders to unleash human potential through coaching in organizations. We unleash human potential by inspiring people to find their voice, supporting leaders to shift their mindsets to solve big, complex, messy problems with grace and clarity, growing leaders who bring the power of coaching to their organizations and the communities they serve, and expanding access to coaching in organizations for all. One way we expand access is through our Growth Rings learning events, and you can find Growth Rings and all our other offerings under the events tab of our website. And if you're not on our mailing list already, you can sign up there on our website as well. Our next Growth Rings learning event is in January, same time, same Zoom. Just check the events calendar for the correct date. We might be changing the date on that one. Another way that we expand access is through our annual CCO Coaching and Organizations Summit. That will be Thursday, April 27th. And you'll get to see both me and Roxanne. I know Roxanne doesn't have her camera on, but we had the pleasure of getting to co-MC last year. And I'm hoping Roxanne will put up with me again this year as we MC our next summit event. There she is. Hey, I can say that we have our speakers locked in for our summit, and I appreciate Chris Diller putting the link there in the chat. I don't think I can make an announcement, but Casey, who's on the line, has scored one of my favorite human beings to be our keynote. So I really wish I could tell you, but I'm not going to because I don't know if it's public info yet. But suffice it to say, it is going to be incredible. So again, Thursday, April 27th. All right, I won't say anything more, Casey. I'm just too excited. I didn't say his name, but I'll leave it at that. I think you've done incredible work setting up our speaker roster. So it's going to be an amazing event. All right, moving on. Another way that we expand access is through our ICF accredited ECHO, or Executive Coaching in Organizations Coach Training Program. Cohort 8 began with orientation in August and is in full swing. They just completed their retreat this past weekend. Incredible group of human beings. How many of us on the call today are alums? I know I've seen several. Yep, there we go. Awesome. Great to see you all. And have any of you attended an ECHO open house yet? Anyone else on the line been one of those? Of course, some of us CCO folks have. That is a great opportunity to hear more about the ECHO Coach Training Program. I believe we have one coming up in December just yet. So if you'd like to know more about that, please do check out the website for more details. We answer any questions you have about the Coach Training Program, except perhaps the meaning of life. But suffice to say, this program is transformational. And so if you check in with any of the alumni that you see here on the call, they can tell you what an amazing program it is. Now I get to my favorite part, which is introducing today's session and speaker. I'll start by sharing her description of the program. So today is Decoding Development through the Enneagram. The Enneagram is an ancient personality typology and growth system with roots in multiple global traditions. It's also the most powerful development tool I've discovered for supporting my own inner work by coaching clients and organizational teams. Whether you're a coach looking to get to the heart of your client's challenges or an organizational leader responsible for developing talent and team effectiveness, join us to discover how the Enneagram can decode development and unlock incredible self-awareness, transformation, empathy, and interpersonal effectiveness. We'll overview the Enneagram system and we'll engage in dialogue, somatic exercises, and application activities as we cover the following topics: the Enneagram versus other personality systems, 5 ways to apply the Enneagram in coaching and with teams, assessments and typing, busting Enneagram myths, and what your Enneagram type means for you as a coach. And we'll share some recommendations for Enneagram education. So all of you will receive an informative slide deck filled with information and recommended resources upon the conclusion of today's session. And this amazing topic is brought to us by Claire Williams. Claire is an executive coach, a team coach, and a compelling facilitator of development experiences. After an early career providing client services in nonprofits, Claire built a fulfilling career as a leadership development consultant and coach at Fortune 50 retailer Target Corporation, while also building her private leadership development consultancy. In February 2019, she left Target to work full-time as an external coach and consultant, eventually founding In-Depth Coaching and Development in 2021. Claire has trained and coached hundreds of leaders, from managers to the C-suite, in dozens of organizations across 5 continents, including Boeing, GE, United Healthcare, Mortenson, Post Consumer Brands, and Starkey. Claire was in the first cohort of the Executive Coaching Certificate Program at the University of St. Thomas, and then went on to serve as faculty. And so now she is co-founder and faculty of the Center for Coaching in Organizations, which, as you know, is a nonprofit focused on coach education. She is passionate about inspiring people to wake up to the richness and potential within themselves and partnering with them to create lives of intention, meaning, and impact. She, as you'll soon see if you don't already know Claire, she emanates warmth, wit, and a powerful curiosity, quickly creating trust, credibility, and a sense of possibility in relationships with group. She did receive her Enneagram training through the Chestnut Pius Enneagram Academy. And these days, in her work at In-Depth Consulting and Development, she focuses on one-on-one coaching and team coaching. And she specializes in leadership development, leadership circle, profile 360, vertical development, and of course, the Enneagram. And one fun fact, we have kids about the same age who met on the playground last year, and her daughter declared emphatically that she was going to be marrying my son. So they're a bit young for that. My kiddo's only 5. He just started kindergarten. So, we'll see.
I think Neil, she actually said she wanted to have a sleepover with him.
That is true. Also, yes, I do recall that. But anyway, it was adorable. And it's easy to see where she gets it from, Claire. So I'll turn it over to you. I'm excited that you're here today.
Oh, I'm glad to be with you guys, and wish me luck, because as Neil's read that description of what we're going to cover today, I was like, all right, that's a lot in 90 minutes time. And I know some of you may not be able to stay for the whole 90 minutes, but I'm thrilled to be with you, and I'll do my very best to make this a really great use of your time. I imagine that there is a mix of people here, a mix of backgrounds and professions, and a mix of reasons why you may have signed up to join in today. So maybe you're a coach, maybe you lead teams, or you work in HR. Maybe you already know the Enneagram really deeply, and you're just curious to hear kind of another version of how you might use this in your work. And maybe it's new to you. You've never heard of it, or you've heard buzz, but don't know much. But I hope there's something in this for everybody. I really tried to design it in a way that, yes, we're going to have to spend a little time overviewing the system. So if you are a little more seasoned with the Enneagram, hopefully even in that you learn something new or it reinforces something. But for the most part, we're going to be trying to hit on what all your questions might be. And in just a minute, I will actually be asking you guys, what do you most want to learn? So you'll be putting that in the chat. You don't have to do it yet, but be letting that question percolate for just a moment. One thing I wanted to open up with was just to share really transparently that if you had asked me 5 years ago if I thought the Enneagram was appropriate to use in organizations, I would have said no. Like, I had just learned about the system. I was just discovering my type. I had started teaching it, kind of not in my business, but more, I was teaching it like at a women's retreat. And And somebody asked me, would you ever use this with teams? Because I was in my day job doing leadership development. And I was like, I don't think so. Like, I think this is just too deep, too vulnerable, too many risks. And I just don't know if it's appropriate. Well, fast forward, I've had more experiences. I've actually now gone through pretty intensive Enneagram certification for coaches, professionals, and my perspective has obviously changed. And I totally understand the concerns. And I don't think that this is a tool to hold lightly. I don't think it's Myers-Briggs. I don't think it's better or worse than that either. I just think it's a different tool for a different purpose. And if we're going to use it, especially with teams, I think we really need to understand what are we inviting people into, and what are the ethical ways to use this. So hopefully, if you came with some, kind of question marks and concerns about that, you'll get to hear at least another perspective today. So you might notice in my name, if you hover over my picture here, it says Claire Williams 3 SPSXSO. So all that is my way of telling you my Enneagram type, as well as what's called my instinctual sequence. So you may not know your Enneagram type. You might not want to share it. You certainly might not know your instinctual sequence, because that's a little more esoteric. So all I'm saying is, if you want to share anything about your Enneagram type, feel free to rename yourself and put that in there. I appreciate Tara acknowledging that she's a fellow 3, but you certainly don't have to. But if that would be fun, just to see kind of who's here and what types might be represented, feel free to do that if you already know your type. All right, so I'm going to share slides now, and I'll try to kind of go on and off so that we can see faces as much as possible. But let me go ahead and pull up some slides. Okay. I am having an issue with my computer, by the way, that when I show slides, I cannot see your faces. So can somebody vocalize that you can see my slides right now?
I cannot see them, Claire.
I cannot see. Yeah.
I'm so glad you're vocalizing. Hold on just a second. Oh, you know why? It's because I didn't share my screen. That would be why. I just started the PowerPoint and didn't share. So now you can see the slides, and now I'm going to try to project it and see if I can still see your faces, which it looks like I can. Can you guys see the slides, or do you see the presenter view?
That's good.
That's good. Thank you. I was fiddling with it before we got on, and I wasn't happy with how it was showing up for me. Okay, so here's how we're going to spend our time today. So we'll start with an intro to the system, just to really ground us in what is the Enneagram, how does it compare to other personality typologies, ethics, best practices, and what are some of the benefits. And then we'll spend just a little bit of time on what might it mean for you as a professional, whether you're a coach or a leader or a team member. It's relevant for all of us in how we show up to our professional roles. So we'll do a little reflection on that. And by the way, if you don't know your Enneagram type, you very well may not know it by the end of our session, but you might start to have a pretty good guess based on some of the things I'm going to share with you. So this is going to be playful. You're not meant to know it all right now. It's just sort of the what if. What if I'm a 4? What might that mean for my professional role? And then we'll go into how might you use this with individuals, whether you're a coach or maybe you lead teams. How might you go about helping people find their type? And then how can you apply the Enneagram to support them in their career growth or their leadership development and so on. And then we'll talk about how would you use this with teams? Sort of the zoom out if you're looking at a system, a collection of people. And as you'll see, this is not a simple system. It's more of a complex system. And so how would you bring it in a way that feels accessible, not overwhelming, as well as safe and ethical for people? We'll talk about that. And then I'll share some recommended resources, and then hopefully we'll have time for some Q&A at the end. And I will just tell you, I've been using the Enneagram with coaching clients pretty much since I discovered it, because I fell in love with it. So that was 5-6 years ago now. And I was using it, I would say clunkily, like I didn't quite know what I was doing. And then about a year ago, I went through some pretty intensive, I actually did 3 weeks of full day courses with this Chestnut Pies Enneagram Academy. And then I've spent the last year doing case reports, and I've had a mentor coach. So it's a pretty intensive process, and I'm hopefully graduating in December. But over the last year, after I've been trained, I have started using this more in organizations. So just to give you a flavor, I've certainly used it with clients from all kinds of organizations, from Fortune 100 to really small mom and pop shops. I've used it with finance companies, large and small. I've used it in privately held companies and and other publicly traded companies. And then my favorite story to tell, and this is recent, is I actually did an Enneagram team offsite with an NFL cheerleading team recently. And that was a blast. We can swap stories about that later because it was fun. So here's what I want to invite from you is, why are you here today? What would be the most valuable thing for you to walk away with? And if you could put that in the chat, that would be super helpful. And Neil, since I'm not able to see the chat super easily, would you mind just kind of chiming in with some of the highlights that are coming through as people?
Absolutely. I got you. No problem, Claire.
Thanks. And as you guys are thinking and popping some answers in, I do just want to say, you know, the Enneagram is one of those things, there's a lot of schools of thought around it, and there's a lot of passion around those schools of thought. And so I just want to note that I'm not here to say there's like one right way to look at the Enneagram or apply the Enneagram. I'm actually here to say there's a lot of ways, and I have found a school of thought, you know, through the Chestnut Pies Enneagram Academy that really resonates for me. I found it really practical and applicable, as well as deep and transformational. And there are some kind of theoretical things that I feel strongly about, such as subtypes, which we'll talk about later today. And then you'll see Enneagram schools or teachers or books that may not feel as passionately about some of those theoretical things. And that's totally okay. But I just want to call out that I'm just sharing my perspective and opinion. It's not meant to be this is the best way. It's just the way that I've found. So
We've got some great ones here in the chat already. How has it accelerated your coaching practice? To learn more about the Enneagram and decide if this is a tool to add to my toolkit, Enneagram with corporate context, better understanding of how to utilize with clients and teams, how to lead my team using the Enneagram. We've all identified our types, but now what? How can we use that to be a more cohesive team? Better understand how my type might help with my growth and effectiveness. And I don't know the Enneagram well, but I'm always looking for how to better understand and develop teams. Also, I'm here because Claire's awesome. Initial understanding, what is my Enneagram report and how to be more effective, and how does this help people and organizations? And this is an intro to Enneagram for me. I'm excited to learn more about my type. So we've got a range of comments.
Great, all over the map, and nothing shocked me. So hopefully you'll all get something out of this today. Perfect. So let's keep going. What I want to share next is just a little bit about what the heck is the Enneagram. So yes, it is a personality typology, meaning it categorizes human personality into some specific types. There are 9 types in the Enneagram. There are more subtypes than that, 27 subtypes to be exact, which we'll define that later today. But it's so much more than a personality typology. I really like to think of the Enneagram as a developmental map. If you look around in nature, you can see all kinds of repeating patterns, right? Like if you see these pictures on the screen and you look at something like, you know, the inside of a succulent or the inside of a nautilus shell, there's all kinds of ways that nature manifests itself in repeating predictable patterns. And the Enneagram holds that the same is true for humans, and that there are these predictable repeating patterns in how human nature tends to manifest. And that if we can understand where in that pattern we tend to fall, it unlocks not only insight about ourselves, but it really points us towards a growth path that is more specific and unique to us. And the reason I love it for coaching is because it's not like you can't do awesome coaching without something like the Enneagram. It just makes it a little more efficient. And I'm a 3, which if you know the Enneagram, I love efficiency. But it's sort of a decoder ring in a way. It takes something that may take you, let's say, 5 coaching conversations to get to the bottom of what's really going on here. Like what's really driving this behavior or this pattern or this hang up. And the Enneagram can offer, kind of shine a light on what that might be. And it just allows you to get to the good work of unhooking from that and transcending that and working through that more quickly. And it also, I think, highlights blind spots that a lot of times people are just really not aware of. It's really revealing a lot of the things that live in the unconscious and making them more conscious, which if you're starting to connect the dots, like, yeah, that's deep, that's vulnerable. And I think it's a lot easier to think about how you apply it in coaching, because we know that coaching at its best is vulnerable and deep and transformational. But it does get a little more tricky when you think about how do you use this with teams, because it's revealing something pretty deep about people. So let me unpack that just a little bit more. a lot of personality typologies, and we're going to look at a side by side of some of these in just a moment, are looking at things like behavioral tendencies or cognitive preferences. Like, are you more of an introvert or an extrovert? Do you like to like think or feel? Are you more of a thinker or a feeler in how you make decisions? And all that's really good and true. And what the Enneagram, though, is resting upon is this assumption that ultimately the personality in Enneagram terms is a defensive protective structure that we developed early in life in order to be safe, in order to belong, in order to survive in the world. And that the personality is extremely useful and helpful and good, and we need it. And in adulthood, we may have overdone it. we may still be relying on these strategies we learned really early in life, and they might not actually be the most effective strategies in every situation. And by starting to spot that, wow, that's actually a defensive mechanism that I'm using, and sometimes it's helpful and I'm going to keep it sometimes, but when am I bringing it into the picture and letting it run the show? And therefore I'm not in choice about what is most useful for me, what's going to make me most effective, what's going to make me most compassionate, what's going to help me lead and inspire others more effectively. And so if we can help people get at the layer of motivation, which is what the Enneagram points to, it's a much deeper, more transformational way. It's not about changing the personality. It's just about being in more choice about when we apply the personality, knowing again, it's a protective mechanism. And we don't have to, we're not only our personality has us sometimes. But if we can start to separate from it a bit, then we get to choose what parts of it to use and when, versus again, it running the show. So I'm just gonna pause there and ask you guys either to chime in out loud or to put in the chat, what are some personality systems that you have used, had success with, heard of? So I'm curious, what do you come to the table already having been exposed to in terms of personality typologies or systems that you use with leaders, teams, and more? And again, feel free to chime in if you want to come off. It doesn't have to just be me talking.
See a vote for Strengths Finders from Emily.
Yeah.
MBTI, Social Styles, Insights, Strengths Finders again, MBTI, Predictive Index, Strengths Quest, Hogan,
Yeah.
DISC, Myers-Briggs,
Yep.
Hogan again, Insights Discovery,
Great.
DISC.
Yeah, those are all awesome. Okay, so you might be asking, well, how do you pick? Like, when would you use one of those versus something like the Enneagram? And what I've attempted to do here, and don't worry when you see the slide, I will not be reading the slide out to you right now, but you will have it in the follow-up to dig in more. I just did a sampling of, these are a few of the ones that I know are used a lot in organizations and with coaching clients. And here's some things that I think might help you discern when to choose one of these versus maybe when the Enneagram might be a good fit. So again, not going to go through it, but at a high level, what I'll say is something like the Hogan is a really great choice if you're looking for something that is very scientifically validated, that's safe for selection and talent assessment, and that is just going to be embraced with open arms by pretty much everybody in an organization, right? Like everybody from leaders to IO psychologists who might work in HR, organizational effectiveness, are probably going to give the thumbs up to Hogan. I will say the Hogan, and I am certified in the Hogan, I find it to be incredible for increasing awareness and helping you like flex and manage behavioral tendencies so that you can be more effective as a leader. I don't find it as powerful for transformational inner growth. So that like unhooking from the deep stuff that's driving the behavior and growing out of your need to be so attached to that. I don't know that the Hogan is really designed for that. And then MBTI, Insights Discovery, I think they're a lot alike in some ways. I think Insights is the one that has 4 colors. It's a lot like DISC as well. Those are awesome, especially if you're working with a team and you just kind of need like an intro to personality, or let's just have a real simple, accessible way for us to understand how people are different and that we can have more empathy for the fact that not everybody's like me. And then knowing that I can flex my style and work better with other people. My personal bias, and you can feel free to disagree with this, is that Myers-Briggs, Insights Discovery, DISC are not as powerful for that deep inside out transformational growth. I think they can offer some transformational growth. My bias is that the Enneagram does an even better job at that. So the Enneagram, is actually not a scientific system, and it doesn't claim to be. And so it's important to know that, because you might have, for instance, HR professionals or IO psychologists in your organization that really, really value scientific rigor and validity of assessments and reliability. You might hear those terms thrown out. And if you're a coach, especially, and you're going to be bringing this to an organization, you need to be ready to be questioned about those things. And what I say about the Enneagram is it's not intended to be scientific. It's not intended to be a perfect diagnostic model. It's meant to be an insight tool and an awareness tool. And it's meant to be held kind of open-handedly. Like, so something like Hogan, it's like, sorry, this is what the scores say. Something like Enneagram, it's more an invitation. Like, how might this be true for you? How might this impact you? And people need to be given a lot more freedom and choice about how they apply it. And it's more complex. And so it might not be the right tool for a company that's looking for, like, we just need to have a baseline understanding of personality styles. I think what I'll point to is on the far column halfway down, it says the focus of the Enneagram is on making unconscious motivations and reactive patterns more conscious. So that's the key. If that's what you're needing to do, whether it's with a team or with coachees, I think the Enneagram could be a really powerful tool for you. But if it's just about, let me manage my behavior a little bit, you might not need something as deep as the Enneagram. I'm going to pause there and actually just open it up for responses, questions. What's coming up for you guys? You can chime in or put them in the chat. Niels, you can read them to me.
I'll just chime in. I'm always fascinated by how attached we are to whatever typology or tool we use. And so I can hear in your descriptions, like giving us, okay, I'm not saying it's wrong, it can be useful. and I love that. And I think that however we use them, we can kind of go deeper. But I really appreciate this comparison that you put together. And I'm fascinated by the Enneagram. So personally looking forward to learning more right now, just for me, which is usually where I start. But yeah, so this is really interesting to me, but I was just kind of fascinated by how attached we get to some of those assessments that we use on a regular basis, because we do see, we do see change in behavior and when we use them.
Love that, Roxanne. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, I try not to be overly attached and really see that, all of these tools are excellent for the right purpose. And so it's more a question of asking, what's the purpose here? What's the need? And what's going to be the most powerful tool for that need? And knowing that some of these tools come with risks. And is this a situation where we need to introduce risk? And is the reward we might get out of that worth the risk? We'll talk more about that as we go. Other thoughts, comments?
There is a thought in the chat here about the idea of there being a progression, for example, from MBTI to Hogan to Enneagram.
Say more, explain what the progression might be.
Hello, Claire Williams. The progression might be.
I know that voice. I can't even see your face right now.
Hello, dear. What it may be is an MBTI will at least get them into the discussion of self-awareness and preference. Mm-hmm. Whereas then we go to Hogan, and that's much more individual for you in terms of, like, here are some watch outs, here are some things that could derail you. I mean, it could be a progression. It doesn't need to be, I think I very much am sometimes an either or kind of person. And I would say that sometimes people just aren't even receptive to assessments, period. And so you have to start them somewhere on the assessment highway. And so MBTI in a group setting is a little bit light FM, but at least it gets the conversation going. And then we're just progressing towards greater layers of self-awareness. That's what I was getting at.
That's brilliant, Jim. And I totally agree that some of these may be an easier kind of entryway into personality theory and exploration, and they might deepen as you go along. That's a lovely point. Good to see you.
And you as well.
Anyone else? Going once? Going twice? All right. There'll be more time later to chime in, and we're also going to have breakout conversations. So this is sort of the upfront, the download of information, and then we're going to get into application and conversation as we go. All right, so I did want to share when I said, the Enneagram doesn't claim scientific origins. What did I mean by that? So the Enneagram is actually rooted in ancient wisdom. It was sort of globally crowdsourced over time as people self-reported, this is what it's like to be me. And then there were, wisdom schools and, kind of developmental growth traditions that would take that information and they kind of codified it over time into the Enneagram because they saw this pattern emerging. And then it was transferred largely orally down through the centuries. So it's centuries old. And there's disagreement about, when did the Enneagram become a personality typology or not? It's also, there's a lot more to the symbol than just the personalities. I'm not going to go into all that today, but just know there's a lot of juicy stuff to dig into about the history of the Enneagram. And there's also a lot of disagreement about the actual history of it. But I want to get into the content now. And so here is the Enneagram symbol. You can see there are 9 types. We are not going to spend a lot of time today, like going into the details of all 9 types. I have one slide I'll show you in a few minutes that shows a little description of each type. But just in the interest of time, I'm going to let you dig into that more on your own. What I am going to invite you to understand more deeply today are the centers of intelligence. So the Enneagram is really a system of 3s. It's a really easy way to start to learn the Enneagram. So there's 9 types, but they're divided into 3 centers of intelligence: body, heart, and head. And there's other ways that it's divided in 3 as well. But let's talk a bit about what we mean by body types, heart types, and head types. So people who are head types, 5, 6s, and 7s, they tend to be more drawn to the kind of the energy of the head. They live up here. They live in the land of ideas or planning, insights. They tend to have, whether it's conscious or not, sort of an underlying fear. And it may be more prominent in some types, like 6s are more obviously fearful. But fear is a driver for all types in the head center. And so they want certainty, clarity, whether that's about what happens next and do I get to do what I want to do? That's what a 7 is. Or do I have enough knowledge and kind of, am I resourced? And am I an expert? That's a little bit more of the 5 energy. But the head is central for these 3 types. And then the heart triad, the 2s, 3s, and 4s. So these are types that are more driven by the heart. And know that what this means is not necessarily that these are people that wear their emotions on their sleeves. In fact, type 3s, which are in the triad, they can be very out of touch with their heart and their emotions. The point is, what's actually driving at an unconscious level is, how do I feel and how do other people feel about me? How am I being perceived? What's my image like? And are people understanding me the way that I want to be understood? And that manifests differently for 2s, 3s, and 4s, but it is about relationships. It is about image, whether we're aware of it or not. And I say that as a 3. And then there is the body center. And so these are types, and I would say this is the hardest center in the West for us to really understand, because we're out of touch with our bodies in our Western culture. So even if you're a body type, you might still have to do some work to really understand, wow, like I am primarily driven by my body, by my gut instinct. I'm interested in like what needs to be done, what needs to be implemented, what's the right action here, more than I'm interested in just like living in the land of ideas or living in the land of like feelings and what do you think of me. It's more about like the here and now and having a sense of control in the here and now. And, I mentioned fear for head types. I should mention that there is an underlying relationship to sadness that drives all the heart types, and an underlying relationship to anger that drives all the body types. I'm going to invite you guys to take a screenshot of this slide, because we're going to do an activity in a little bit and you may want to be able to come back and reference it. Before we do that activity, as you're taking your screenshot, I want to introduce just a quick meditation we're going to do together using the centers of intelligence. And so take your screenshot and then get centered. And if you're comfortable, you can put your feet on the floor. You might even want to close your eyes, but you don't have to. This will just be very brief. You are going to be invited to speak out loud. And it's okay with me if you do that off mute, but you can also do it on mute, or you don't have to speak at all. But this is a chance just to really tune into the energy of these 3 centers. And I want to mention that we all have all 3 centers of intelligence. It's just that some of us are drawn and driven by one more than the other two. So part of the inner work of the Enneagram is bringing the centers more into balance and having access to all three. And so that's what this meditation is about. So here we go. Eyes closed if you want. And I want to invite you to put your hand on your forehead so that it's skin to skin. Really feel the touch of your hand on your head. And I want you to imagine that all of your energy, all of your concentration and focus and attention is funneled right there to the spot where your hand meets your head. And just really notice what that feels like. And now drop your hand to your chest, or what in yoga they call your heart center. And same thing, just really let the energy concentrate there. Almost like it gets sucked everywhere from everywhere else in your body, right here to your heart center. Just let, almost, you might picture like a bright light or something. That helps you picture the energy concentrating in one place. Notice what that feels like in the heart center. And then finally, drop your hand to your belly or your gut and let your energy drop there too. All your energy channeled right here to your gut. What do you notice from here? And just notice, you don't need to say anything, but was there one of these that was most accessible to you or not? Was there one that felt kind of weird or distant in some way? Did they feel off balance or in balance? And now we're going to do a quick exercise that is more of a balancing exercise. And so again, I invite you to put your hand back up on your forehead. And I'm going to model this for you, and then we'll do it together 2-3 times. Actually, I'll just say it. We're going to do it together 3 times after I model it, so people aren't confused. So here we go. I'm going to model it. Hand on forehead and say I. Hand on chest and say am. Hand on belly and say here. I'll model it all together one time. I am here. And now we all do it 3 times. I am here. Really feel the energy and balance as you do this. I am here. One more time. I am here. Okay. So I'm going to open it up now again, just for any comments, questions, things you thought about, noticed, wonder about when it comes to the centers of intelligence. Going once? Okay. Let's keep going then. So this is where we talk about ethics and best practices with the Enneagram before we launch into some activities in just a moment. So super important to know when you're using the Enneagram, whether it's with a coaching client, someone that you lead, if you lead a team, or your whole team, or people in a leadership program in an organization, it's important that everybody feels like they have the choice whether or not they want to share. That they don't feel like, you know, my Enneagram number is going to be posted on the outside of my cubicle at work. It needs to be their choice. I have never had anybody decline, but it certainly could happen. Everybody's only one type. This is important. And this is me busting an Enneagram myth. I talk to people sometimes and they're like, yeah, I'm like a 3 and a 5, which actually is very rare that someone would think they're a 3 and a 5. But I help people understand, according to the Enneagram, according to this wisdom, you may have behavioral characteristics of many types, but the core motivation aligns with one type, and finding that one type can be a process for some people, but then the growth can unlock once you do. Your type doesn't change. It's not like I used to be a 5 and now I'm a 7. I believe you're born with your type. A lot of Enneagram teachers believe that. Some people might say it forms in early childhood. My belief is you're born with it. Only the client can determine their type. So none of this like, oh, you're not a 7, you're totally an 8. I mean, as a coach, I will offer people, I'm not convinced yet that you're a 7, or here's some things that I'm still questioning about you being a 7. but ultimately it's the person's job to decide what they are. And I will say this is a risk with using it with teams, is we really like to tell people what we think of them, and like that we think we see the truth. And I worked with a team this year, and everybody was convinced that a guy on the team was a 6, which is more of like an anxious questioning type. But he was the 5-iest 5 I have ever met. I mean, like really like read the encyclopedia at night, for fun. And as we get in, and you don't know the Enneagram, you'll understand what I'm talking about with type 5 more. But I really had to work with his team to be like, you guys, he's a 5. He's identified as a 5. I believe he's a 5. And we cannot know for sure from the outside what someone is. It's important to know that no type is better or worse. There's no types that are like better leaders or not good leaders. Every type has their blind spots, shadows, lights, all of that. It's meant to be used for growth and not judgment. And it's certainly not meant to be weaponized. And it is certainly not meant to be used as an excuse. Like, well, I'm just an 8 and I can kind of be harsh with people and people just need to deal with that. No, like you might actually need to look at why am I harsh sometimes, and is there any like flexing or softening that I need to do in order to be more effective. So it's a both and, right, of like accepting ourselves for who we are, but also understanding that the personality is a defense mechanism that may not always be serving us. And then there are a couple of levels of application for using the Enneagram. So level 1, I would say, is sort of like more high levels, a little safer, less deep. And often the route I go when I'm working with teams and organizations. So more about knowing yourself, having empathy for others, and then being willing to flex so you work more effectively together. And then especially in coaching, the deeper level 2, becomes more accessible, I think, and appropriate, which is what are the unconscious motivations and how do you unhook from those for transformational growth? I'm not going to go into this because I think it's probably clear by now, but I'll put it up on the screen. What are the benefits, especially at that level 1, kind of the simpler level for individuals and for teams? And then a couple quotes here that might inspire you. And so with that, I want to say one more time, any questions before we keep moving and you see the 9 types and start to apply this to yourself? Okay. All right. So this is a very simple slide of the 9 types. I chose to only include each type sort of headline, or title, like the peacemaker is what we sometimes call type 9. And because the Enneagram is about motivation, I chose right here to just show you what is the core desire and the core fear for every type. Now, if I were using this with a team, I would not start and just focus in on desire and fear. I would actually have different materials I use with teams that are a little more about like how this shows up. What are the watch outs? What are the gifts and strengths that they bring to the team? But I know a lot of us are taking a little bit of a coaching angle on this, and I encourage you to think about, okay, if somebody is a 9 and they desire harmony, peace, and they fear conflict and chaos, how might that show up in their behavior? And you can probably start to take some guesses, right? That they might be conflict avoidant, not necessarily say the hard thing, or state a clear point of view as easily because they like for things to feel harmonious. So I'd like to invite you again to take a screenshot of this because you might want to come back to it. And now I want you to jot down what type or types, as you read this slide, do you think you might be? And maybe you already know, maybe this is your first time even checking into this. I'll give you just a moment to read it, jot down a couple hypotheses about your possible type. And then we're going to go into a breakout. All right, so chime in. Let's keep the conversation going. I would love to hear more voices in the space. What are some of the things you came up with about how a type might impact how you show up as a coach or leader or team member?
Claire, we didn't have time for that. We barely had enough time to introduce each other. I'm sorry. And basically, we just went through our experience with the Enneagram.
Great.
So in terms of have you had it? What do you know about it? The general conversation was anything that can enable deeper self-awareness is inherently a good thing. But we also said, to quote my favorite coach, Ann Boyum, you better put on your own mask before you assist others. So if you haven't had someone walk you through and take the assessment, that's the first place to start.
Yeah, great. Yeah, there are no rules. So thanks for just acknowledging that you broke the non-existent rules, Jim, and used the time as you wanted to, which is great. So what else came up?
Roxanne. Oh, go ahead, Niels.
Nope, you.
I was going to say that Roxanne made a clever response in terms of analyzing how we feel our type is, right, with the Enneagram compared to where we sit versus the insights, right? So for someone like myself who has never found out my type, I've taken the insights and I'm a high 9, right? Director, kind of in charge. And for this type, I would feel that I'd likely sit maybe in the enthusiast or the challenger. So I'd love to see the relativity there, right?
Yeah.
Like see those come together. So that's kind of what we had talked about.
Very cool. Yeah, like what kind of overlap or correlation do you see between some of these systems? And I can speak to, I know that there's been some examination of that with the MBTI, and I believe it's been pretty inconclusive. Like there are some links, but it's kind of interesting because MBTI is about cognitive preferences. In some ways that's linked to these defensive personality structures, but in other ways they're kind of separate. And so, you could be a 7, but be any color on the insights, for instance.
Sure.
Intriguing.
Thank you, Claire.
Thank you for that. Awesome. So let me ask you this, how do you think this would be helpful with clients? Anything coming up or like what doubts do you have about using this with, and I say clients, but I really mean coaching clients or individuals. If you're in a supportive role as a leader, HR partner.
Well, I'll say that I haven't typically introduced the Enneagram to my clients. However, what I end up doing is sort of evaluating. I'm coaching a 5. I will coach a 5 differently than I will coach a 7.
Yeah.
A 5 is, very direct and very intellectual. A 7 is more of a visionary and an experimenter. So I use it that way in terms of trying to figure out what's the best way to ask questions or ways to kind of guide them through my coaching.
Brilliant, Karen. I love that. So it's less in front of the curtain. It's more behind the curtain for you to modify your style. I think that's wonderful. And I know, of course, you know this, like we can't decide our client's type, but you can take a pretty good guess. You can at least figure out what they're probably not. And I use the rule with that, Karen, of like, do no harm. I'm not going to use a coaching approach that would be harmful, but it doesn't hurt if I think I might be coaching a 5. And so I choose to be a little more like intellectual with them.
Right.
That can only help based on what I'm reading. And yeah, I love that point. Any others?
Just wanted to say, this is Dan, the fact that I've been around Enneagram for quite a while, but more in a setback, easy friendship settings. And I'm finding that when it comes to sort of the formal enterprise setting, it's a little hard because you really do have to have sort of psychological safety there to be able to go to the depths that Enneagram does go to. And I think that sort of keeps people a little bit hesitant.
Yep.
Because you're looking for more behavioral issues at an enterprise level rather than just a heart issue. So that's my only drawback of bringing it into those kind of contexts.
Yes, I hear you. Like it feels like it's more appropriate for individual use than with teams. And I appreciate that. And as I said, I shared the same concern, and I still am very thoughtful about how and when I use it with teams, but in just a bit, we'll get into what that can look like and how you might decide if it's right and how to create the right conditions. Chris, you look like you were maybe about to say something.
Yeah, hey Claire. So just in that very short time period where I was chatting with the two participants, I kind of realized that this could be really helpful in crisis management and kind of when things are happening that, you know, that we're not prepared for. I explained to them I am a recruiting manager at Amazon right now. And with all the layoffs that were just announced, I can't remember her name, but who was just in my group, but she said that I wouldn't be able to get anything done. And I said someone literally chimed me that day before yesterday, Chrissy, how are you getting anything done? All I can think about is like, is getting laid off. All I can think about is this. And I was like, well, you just focus on things that you can control. It just seems as simple to me, but like understanding and kind of responding with empathy and being able to manage a team through this period of uncertainty and crisis, I think this could be really helpful.
Yes. And I love that, Chrissy, because it sounds like you don't even necessarily need to know people's Enneagram types to be able to do that. But just it's an empathy building tool just to know, wow, not everybody is processing this in the same way that I am. And so what are the different ways people might be internalizing this experience, and how can I be there for them? And you don't have to know their type to do that, but you just know, like, some people are going to be more action oriented. Some people are going to be feeling a lot of feelings, and you watch for those signs and then can meet them where they are. Is that what you're getting at, Chrissy?
Yep, exactly.
I love it. Chrissy's my friend from college, and I haven't like seen her since college.
I know. I was like, well, I saw this on LinkedIn, and I was like, oh, I want to hear it. And so I've already sent a screenshot to our college friends. So
thanks, Chrissy. Yay. All right, let's keep going.
Claire?
Or one more comment. Yep, please.
Well, just a quick side question. Maybe you'll get to this. Jen was asking if there's any assessments that you recommend, or if you typically just explain the Enneagram and let clients self-identify. Of course, Rob put in the CP Enneagram website as a good place to start.
Great. Yes, I am going to get to that actually. And I think 2 or 3 more slides. So hang with me. Okay, I'm going to keep us moving because I really want to get to the good stuff about teams. So I'm actually going to move a little more quickly through this because I think these ideas have come through. These are ways, if you're using this with individuals, just not the only ways, but 3 ideas I have for how you might do this, whether you are coaching the person or more supporting their development. And then I have listed a more advanced option at the bottom that I would say requires a pretty large depth of knowledge with the Enneagram, maybe even professional training, because you got to know things like, what's the passion? What does that mean? What's the fixation? You know, so there's all kinds of wonky terminology with the Enneagram that we're not going to get into today. But I give this to you just to say, man, there's a lot to go deep on if you are interested and want to learn more. There are very, very in-depth ways to apply this with clients and people that you support. All right, continuing on, I want to just reveal that this is a thing. So this is something that I mentioned earlier that I'm passionate about in terms of theory. And I think this is a really important piece of Enneagram theory that gets left out by some thinkers, books, websites, assessments, that causes people to have a lot of trouble finding their type. They get mixed up or mistyped because they don't know about subtypes. Very briefly, the subtypes are formed by the combination of your dominant type, which is like, let's say for me, a 3, but you combine that with what's called your dominant instinct, like your instinctual drive, and you put them together, and that makes your actual subtype. So I am a self-preservation 3. And I'm not going to unpack what all these mean, but basically these are animal biological survival drives that function actually at a more impulsive level even than the personality structure does, but it combines with them and it creates kind of a alchemy of sorts. And it really helps people find their true type when you're looking at the subtypes. And so with that, let's get to assessments of typing. So first, I'll say guiding principles here would be that, again, only the client can decide. The assessments, if you use like a formal assessment process, they're a data point, it's never a diagnosis. And then, like I said, the subtypes matter. So I have uploaded, I will be uploading these slides for you guys, and I'll link these things in the version that you guys are going to access. But these are just a few of the typing approaches that I think are most reliable and helpful. I mean, one is doing a typing interview with someone who's certified to do that. That is obviously more time intensive and expensive. I prefer the CPS Compass. That's my favorite. It's a newer assessment that comes from the school I was trained at. So yes, my bias. I also think the IEQ-9, which is used in a lot of organizations, is a really good and accurate tool. I don't love every part of the report, but I think it's an accurate typing tool. And then the Chestnut Pies Academy has a free micro test that I would say it's not meant to be super accurate. It's more meant to be like a first best hypothesis that takes you deeper. So I don't necessarily point you to it because it's always right, but it's a good entry point if you're looking for a free test. Honestly, you can also just show somebody the 9 types and have them pick out what they think they are. And sometimes it's easy for people to do, sometimes it's not. A lot of people ask about other tests that are out there, especially free ones. And generally speaking, I just don't recommend them because I think it confuses people when they're mistyped. And then they go down the wrong development path. So Jen, does that answer your question or any comments or questions about typing?
That does. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Okay, so I'm going to keep that off the screen if I can. There we go. Teams. So I know this is what a lot of us are hungry to dig into together. What I want to do is invite all of us to read this case study together. We're going to start there before I launch into, I don't know, my perspective and my advice. I actually want you to do some thinking based on what you've learned so far today or what you already know about the Enneagram. So I'm going to give you guys now on the screen this case study. Again, recommend you take a screenshot of it. We're going to send you into longer breakout rooms, so I won't call you back after 5 minutes this time. And I'm going to invite you to take a few moments, read the case study. I chose not to put in a lot of information about people's actual type numbers because that gets really detailed. So let's just focus on those centers of intelligence: head types, heart types, body types. This is where you might need to go back and look at the screenshot from earlier of the centers. But just imagine you have a team with this scenario, and then you as a coach or a HR professional or team leader, you can kind of see that these are the types that are represented on the team, you know, either by best guess or you did a typing process with your team. What does that then tell you about why these challenges might be occurring? And I like the second question here of how could they use their mix of Enneagram types on the team to solve for these gaps? So it's not about people changing their personalities. It's how do we use the gifts we have here and solve and flex to address what's missing? And then are there any risks in the situation of using the Enneagram? And a final question about the team leader and what they might need to be thinking about. Okay, so Chris, would you put us in breakouts for, yeah, I mean, it's not gonna be 5 minutes, y'all, but it's not gonna be like 20 either. So how about let's do 8 minutes and let's do breakouts of 3 again and give people a chance to talk. Hi, everybody. Okay, let me hear from you. What came up in those conversations, whether it was on topic or off topic?
Mhm.
Very
I'll
good.
go. I can't stand the silence for too long. So so Jim Hoare and I were in a group together and we talked about like, what does the group want? Like, are they even open to playing in this space? Because there is a little bit of fun associated with Enneagram, but also sort of that teetering of like psychological safety. And how open are people to going there? Because I do think the success of the application, and I could say this about practically anything, is like how open people are to diving in and being a little vulnerable. And so we had some conversation about that. That's like, well, the team gets along okay, but there's not a lot of true connection and camaraderie. And is that a problem? Like, maybe that's okay. You know, maybe the team functions just fine without connection and camaraderie, but the pace needs to increase. Well, maybe Enneagram isn't the right tool then, in that situation. Like, what's the biggest problem, or what's the best? The question that kept coming up for me is like, what do you want to leave after, if we're spending 2 hours together, what do you want to leave having accomplished? And how could the Enneagram be in service of that? Or is it best served in a different way? So those were some of the things we were talking about.
Those are awesome. Hi, Jen. Those are awesome questions. Like, they're exactly the questions that you should be asking if you're in a position to possibly support a team, whether you're the leader, coach, consultant. It's exactly right. Like, it should not be just a given that any team that comes to you needing some support or saying, we want to do an offsite, or I feel like we maybe need to grow, but I'm not sure how. It's not an automatic, like, great, you need the Enneagram. So those are the questions to ask. Are they open? How open? The biggest one, I'm just gonna go ahead and say, this is like number one, like ground rule, never break this rule. Do not use the Enneagram on a team where there is really low trust and psychological safety and toxicity. They're not ready for it. You might start with some other intervention, you know, like doing discovery interviews and doing like a trust offsite or something. But I would not introduce the Enneagram until there's at least a baseline of trust. And that's tricky, guys, because there's no like accurate way to test whether there's enough trust on a team. So you have to use your discernment about how much reward could be gained from the Enneagram and how much risk is there in this situation. And does the reward outweigh the risk? And how, if there are risks, how are we going to manage those? So keep chiming in. I love the conversation. What else came up?
As an 8, we discussed, I'll turn my video on.
That's
As
my
an
bad.
8, we talked about, hey, oh, now it's all what kind of pressure. We talked about how the leader as an 8 can get in the way of a lot of this. In that, especially if you use the Enneagram as the 8's biggest concern is being vulnerable, and if they're leading the group, and if that comes out and they're not ready for that and not able to do whatever work there is, it's going to be a pretty big conflict.
Yeah, it's a great point about the watch outs for 8s, but Rob or anybody else, what about the strengths that the 8 as the leader would bring to the situation? And for those that aren't familiar, the 8 is the challenger, kind of probably maybe the most intense, kind of high energy, get it done type on the Enneagram. So what's the gift in that?
I think potentially the gift with, in particular, I'll say starting with the head types is if they're getting stuck ideating, analyzing, and planning, is there a connection that he can make to the impact that too much ideating, analyzing, and planning is having on the results that they're trying to achieve? And with the heart types, is there more to explore around the valuing of relationship to help them work at this differently or work with one another differently to pick up the pace?
Yeah, those are all great points. And I want to double click on the one about relationships and the heart types. Yeah, I mean, I would assume, you know, looking at this case study here, that those that are feeling like they're on an island might be the heart types that are wanting more camaraderie and connection. And that is going to be more important to heart types oftentimes than the rest of the team. And then the question becomes, well, does that mean we all migrate to the heart types way? Or do we meet in the middle somewhere? Or do they have to get over it? Or do we just hire people that are just like us? And then we get into issues where we're hiring with bias and lack of diversity of all kinds. So, you know, there's no easy answer here, but it's a rich place to explore with the team. What else? Maybe one more comment about your conversations.
I find it interesting that this team would move at a slower pace, having a leader that is an 8, right? Like you would think that this person would be able to keep her team or his team at task, right? And be more able to coach and develop and improve the areas that they're trying to fix here. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. What do you guys make of that? Any thoughts?
I mean, the story I made up was that they were all 8s. So like being an 8, like you can never move fast enough. So like all these 8s are like, y'all aren't moving fast enough, but like they're all saying like, we're fine, we're good. So I don't know. I love making up stories and thank you for putting a case study together because it's just an opportunity to use our imagination. But that's the story that I made up. Was a bunch of 8s thought we were moving too slow.
I mean, Claire, I think the other thing that needs to be brought into the picture is the fact that whether they're a healthy personality or not a person, you know, I mean, a healthy 8 is very different than an unhealthy 8, right? And where they're going to get their strength. And so if you have a team that have unhealthy numbers, or it's going to be pretty toxic in a lot of ways also.
That's right. Yeah. And like, if it was a really unhealthy 8 leading this team, I might have put something in the case study like, You know, the team feels like their leader's driving too hard and they're expected to work at all hours of the day and night or something like that, or their leader is harsh and disrespectful sometimes. And that would be a clue, like there might be some unhealth in the picture here that is Enneagram related, but is also about a layer of unhealth that needs to be addressed. Yeah, really great point. Okay, well, I know we just have a few minutes left together, so I'm going to keep us going. Here are a couple of options for applications with teams that I just offer for you to take away and think about and play with. So I have one here that I would call more of a low touch option that I think is more appropriate for someone who's in-house in an organization already, like you're a team leader, you know, or maybe you're an HR partner and you get a team reaching out saying, we want to use the Enneagram, what should we do? I mean, I will say my bias is always like, it's great to have somebody with some expertise because the Enneagram is, it's a deeper tool and therefore a more high risk tool. But I'm not going to say blanket statement, a team should never, ever use this on their own. I just think the leader, the HR partner, whoever's supporting should help whoever's in charge proceed with some caution. I would not ever recommend that an external coach or consultant comes inside an organization and uses the Enneagram unless you're professionally trained on it. I think that's just unwise probably, and possibly even a liability. But if a team wants to self-guide, again, make sure that there's trust and psychological safety, and that everyone is aware, like this is the level of vulnerability that gets revealed with the Enneagram. Like people are going to be revealing their deepest motivation that may have been unconscious before they found out the Enneagram. And so like, it's not StrengthsFinders, it's not Myers-Briggs. And I think you get more powerful transformation in a team if there is that baseline of trust and psychological safety. But again, if it's not there and it's hard to measure that, then I think you need to know the risks and know when to avoid it or guide the team a different direction. And then there's all kinds of conversations you can have about strengths, challenges, what do we see here? And then I'll pull this up next. So this would be more advanced. Again, if you had deeper training, I would recommend something like this. And maybe this is just to give you a picture, like, do I want to get Enneagram certified? Do I want to make this a part of my coaching or consulting practice? This is how I do a lot of the offsites that I've been doing over the last year. Is doing assessments and typing. And I really, unless it's a giant group, I really try to get one-on-one debriefs with everybody, even 30 minutes, so that I can help people validate their type. And I also do discovery interviews in those. So what's working on your team? What is a challenge that the team is running into? Any interpersonal dynamics that you see on the team. So I walk into the offsite with some knowledge of that. And then I do kind of my back end plotting of the team on, I have it here on the second bullet, an Enneagram team map to say, where are the, like, what story do I see forming and how does this overlap possibly with what I heard from these discovery interviews and from the team leader? And then in person with them, either like a half day or a full day, we might do panels where we hear from each type, and that builds a ton of empathy. We might use the floor mat. I have an actual like life-size Enneagram floor mat. And we stand around the mat and everybody stands on their number. And then we use some of the lines that are on the Enneagram, which I didn't talk about today, but that's a kind of a double click part of the system. But use that embodied exercise to really say, where are we as a team? Where could we be? What solutions are available to us? Even if we move along some of these arrow lines in the Enneagram, or we use our wings, those are terms you may not know yet. But again, it's just a preview of like, there's a lot here that you can use with the team. Questions, pushback, what's coming up as you contemplate using this with teams? And then I'm going to share resources and then do like apparently like 60 seconds of Q&A. Anything now? Okay. All right, then maybe we can do more than 60 seconds Q&A. I'm not going to talk about this. It's here. I will embed links into this for the version you're all going to get. But these are just my biased recommendations about the best place to look next if you want to deepen your Enneagram knowledge and application. And so with that, I'm going to go off of the screen share and open it up for what are you taking away from this? What questions do you have? Let's just kind of do a mix of takeaways and questions for our last few minutes together.
I have a quick question, Claire. Well, hopefully it's quick. The difference between subtypes and wings. I didn't hear you talk about wings, but I've heard other Enneagram people talk about wings
Yeah.
as opposed to subtypes.
Right. Yeah, my again bias on that is I think the wings are interesting, but I don't think they're all that important for understanding your personality. I think they make good growth stretches for you. Like if I'm a 3, it helps if I can lean into 4 and 2 on either side of my 3 number. But I don't use them as a subtype to explain like I'm a 3-wing 4 and that means XYZ for my growth. I think the actual instinctual subtypes are more important than that.
For the, can you explain the letters behind your name again? I know
Yeah.
they're associated with those other
Yeah,
subtypes.
so the 3 instincts are self-preservation, social, and then one-to-one. But sometimes when I'm not in an organizational setting, technically it's called the sexual instinct. So you can imagine why I don't bring that to a team. But when I write this, I'm writing what my sequence is of those 3 instincts. And so I'm
Okay.
self-preservation dominant. I'm what's called social repressed. And both of those things are important for my growth path. And then my one-to-one instinct is in the middle of my sequence, which also is significant, but not as significant as the other 2.
That explains the SX. I was
Yeah.
like, where's the one-to-one? I don't see it.
Oh yeah, I
can't
should
figure it
have
out.
probably done that differently.
Claire, do people have problems with their type even if they pick it? You know, there's the notion of social desirability in assessments.
Everybody
So,
wants to.
so I mean, how do you overcome that as a coach?
I mean, I leave it in their hands. Truly, it's I give them the information and the perspective that I can, and I will not lie and say I think you nailed your type if I don't. But I will say here are the things that I'm still not confident about. But ultimately, only you can know. And let's go down this path. If you think you're a 1, let's go down that path together and see where it leads you. And let's keep revisiting the question. But yeah, everybody wants to be a type 7, the enthusiast. And everybody but a type 7 basically hates their type when they learn it. It's like, no. And maybe 7s, I don't want to speak for you. Maybe you also were disappointed in your type, but it's, yeah, like Neil said in the comments, like it shows you your dark side. It's not strengths finders.
I appreciate the credit. I think it might have been Rob that put that pointer out there,
Oh.
but there certainly is a dark side to
Yep.
it.
Rob's ray of
Wow.
sunshine. Absolutely.
My husband is so smart. So smart. Yeah.
Well, I hate to cut it short, Claire. We're coming right up on time, and I want to be
Okay.
respectful of everybody's time and attention today. A couple quick housekeeping things. There is another Growth Rings happening in January. We're taking a short break for the U.S. holidays here happening. Again, plug for our summit in April 27th. It's going to be a ton of fun. Would love to see you there. Claire, it is always a delight and a pleasure to get to spend time with you and learn from you. I can't thank you enough on the behalf of myself and the entire team for you sharing your wisdom and insight today. You really are a beacon of knowledge and warmth, and it's a pleasure to get to spend time with you. With that said, if there's any other hearts, or I see the hearts showing up, if there's any other takeaways, Chris has got a couple of links to our website there in the chat, both for the summit and to sign up for more info. We do have an email newsletter. We hate email as much as you do, so we use that sparingly. But if you'd like to sign up for our newsletter, please hit that link. And with that, I thank you all for attending.
Thanks, everybody. Great to see you all.